Okay, Year 11, welcome to your video tutorial on intellectual property. Intellectual property is the second syllabus dot point or subset in 8.1.1 social and ethical issues. Okay, unlike the evolution of software applications, there is a lot of dot points under intellectual property. We are going to cover most of these. I just want to draw your attention to the use of software covered by a license agreement. So dot point number, like sub dot point number 5, it says see course specifications document. So the course specifications document, or the course specs, is a supplementary document to the syllabus. If you go and look in that document, it will have 8.1.1 intellectual property, and it will actually list the additional information that you need for that dot point. So we will be going through that in one of the activities, so you don't have to worry about it for the moment, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the course specs document because the course specs document will be really important moving forward. So today we are going to look at intellectual property. So the big question that really we're trying to ask today is, all right, I know that we did a bit of the evolution of software, but now we're here and we kind of get a picture of what software is. Who owns the software? And I know that seems like a really general question, but who owns it? Do I own it as a developer? But someone buys it. When they buy it, do they own it? So that's hopefully what we will clarify today, and a bit of the legal rights around that and the conceptual ideas or the concepts to do with ownership. So there is two key terms that you need to understand, and you need to know the difference. The important thing with this is some people will use these terms interchangeably. So and incorrectly really, people will misuse the word intellectual property when they mean copyright, and copyright when they mean intellectual property. So the first thing to establish is what's the difference. Now, the official definition of what intellectual property is it's the fruits of mental labor. So it's specifically defined by that, because my intellectual property doesn't necessarily have to be something tangible or something I can see, feel, or touch. It can actually be a concept or an idea. So my intellectual property is, the fruits of mental labor, or basically something that has come to life, either an idea or something physical, because of some kind of thought or process that I have done. Either something I've thought of or something I've created is basically the summary. Okay, so I own intellectual property, so I either own my ideas or my thoughts or something I've created. Now, this is where copyright's different. Say that idea or thought or something that I created, I want to put out in the public. I want to make sure at the same time that I get all the credit and I get any of the monetary, what's the phrase? Gosh, any of the monetary rewards, there you go, monetary rewards from that idea or thing I've created. So here comes copyright. Copyright are the legal rights that protect someone's intellectual property. So I have an idea or a thought, and I protect my idea or thought legally with copyright. Hope that makes sense. So when I buy a piece of software as a consumer, so when I go to JB Hi-Fi, or when I go online to office.com and I buy a piece of software, some of the time it costs me money. Some of the time it doesn't cost me money. But no matter which way, I do not own it. If I buy a piece of software, I do not own it. What I do own is the right to have that copy. In a while, we're going to look at, what I am actually allowed to do with that copy and what my rights are and what my responsibilities are. My rights and the rights of the developer are all protected under copyright. Remember, copyright is the legal rights that I'm given for intellectual property. So my rights as a person who's bought the software and the rights of the developer are all covered under the Copyright Act of 1968. Now, that was the first time it came in. The fancy words that say subsequent amendments just mean there's been a couple of changes up until that. It was initially done in 1968. Okay, so in the activity, you guys will spend some time looking at license terminology. Okay, terminology that is used in different license agreements. So when I buy a piece of software in a moment, I will also buy with it, it also comes with, a license agreement. That is under copyright. And remember when I've just said back here that my rights and the rights of the developer are protected via copyright? That is put into effect with every single piece of software in terms of a license. Most of you guys just rush and click, I agree or I accept. You know, those huge long pages of dot points and you're like, whatever, I just want to get into it. I agree, I accept. What you're usually accepting is a license to engage with that piece of software. That license is very wordy and has certain terminology. According to our syllabus, these are the key terms that you should look out for, but you will cover these and the definition of each of these pieces of terminology in an activity. The type of license agreement changes depending on the type of software I buy and the type of license it has associated with it. So every piece of software comes with a license agreement. Depending on the type of license I buy, depends on the type of license agreement. Yep. So for example, one of the most common types of software licenses is a commercial software license. That basically means I've bought a copy, I am entitled to that copy. Most of the time it comes with a product key or a way to authenticate it. A commercial license usually involves me paying some kind of amount of money. So either going up to JB Hi-Fi or, going on to office.com and spending $120 for a copy of Microsoft Word or the Office Suite is a really good example of a commercial software license. That commercial software license is covered for the developer under copyright. So it's covered by copyright. That means I can't go out and make changes to it, modify it. I cannot distribute it out. So once I bought my copy, I can't go, hey guys, who wants another copy? It is not able to be distributed. I'm not able to modify it. And then obviously, because I'm not able to modify it, some software licenses, this will make sense, but I'm not then able to redistribute any of my modifications. So there is copyright covered under it. That covers my use of it, but also the developer's right to the intellectual property. With it, I cannot distribute my copy of Microsoft Word. I can't modify Microsoft Word, obviously, because I don't have access to the source code, but I also can't redistribute all my any modifications. It's the most common type of license agreement. The extension on the license agreement, I'm just going to jump down this table just down to the bottom. You might notice this site one and the copyright, the commercial license in terms of the tick box, the thumbs up to say it does involve this, or the nose, basically mirrors the commercial. So site and commercial are basically identical. So I just wanted to make a clarification of that. A site license is pretty much an extension of a commercial license. However, a site license will allow a user, or an organization to distribute a set of licenses for a geographic site. So for example, it's not usually common, but like Panola High School or St. Clair's or, Marion decide that they want to buy a particular piece of software that the Catholic Education Office doesn't offer, but they want to distribute it to, around their site instead of buying individual commercial licenses. So, something with here's this product code, here's that product code. They can buy a site license from the developer. Now, that will give them usually a bit of a reduced price per person than if they bought a commercial license, obviously, because they're going to be buying it for a whole site. They would come to agreement with the developer about how much that's actually going to cost. What it'll dictate is, certain devices on that geographic site will be able to be access an installer and install a copy of that software. Site licenses are changing how they work a little bit, particularly with the, the consumerization of the cloud and cloud computing, which we'll talk about in a couple of dot points time. But essentially, a site license is an extension of a commercial license. The next one I'll just draw your attention to is shareware. Now, shareware is really important because a lot of students confuse shareware with freeware because they go shareware, oh, that means I can share it. They're not essentially wrong. However, Shareware is like the prequel to a commercial license. What a shareware license is it gives the user the ability to trial a piece of software and then buy it. Usually at the point of buying, their license changes over from being a shareware to a commercial license. So let me give you an example. An example of a shareware license could be I could download a trial version of Photoshop. That's still covered by copyright. Obviously, the developers still own the copyright, but the shareware license also dictates my right to trial that program, for X amount of time. Most developers set a time, like 4 weeks, a month, 2 weeks, whatever. With that particular piece of software, unlike with my copy of, Microsoft Word with my commercial license, I can distribute that trial. So, my friend next to me in software design might be like, oh, do you have that trial version of Photoshop? And I can be like, here, cool, no worries. Yep, have the trial version. Here, I'll actually airdrop it to 400 people around the school. I can distribute that trial version of the software as many times and as many places that I want. What I can't do that's in line with commercial licensing is modify it, because obviously I usually don't have access to the code behind it, and redistribute it. Okay, usually what happens around the time of buying, like I said, is that shareware license gets converted into a commercial license. So I trial Photoshop for 4 weeks. Photoshop will then say, you need to buy this piece of software. And upon buying it, it turns into a commercial license where I can no longer distribute. I hope that makes sense. The next type of licenses that you get are public domain licenses. Public domain licenses are pretty much as they suggest. If I make a piece of software and release it under a public domain license, I have no traditional copyright under it as a developer. So I have no right to monetary gain from it. My intellectual property is usually, no one necessarily has to, acknowledge me. People are able to, with my software, distribute it. So send the version that I push out. They are also able to modify what I push out. Then they are actually also able to redistribute anything that they've modified. So depending on it, depending on the ability to modify and redistribute, I might have pushed out my original public domain software with access to the code. I might also push out my public domain software without access to the code. So, someone could come along, and we're going to go over this term in the next few lessons, so don't panic, but someone could reverse engineer it and redistribute it, or they could use the source code that I give them to make some changes and redistribute. The next one that is pretty straightforward is freeware. However, unlike public domain, when I distribute freeware, so if I put out my software as freeware, I still am covered under copyright. So even though I won't get monetary gain necessarily because it's free, I am able to still have, it still says this is my intellectual property. People can with it, they can push out as a developer and as other developers or as users, they can distribute as many copies of my version of the freeware. In terms of modification and redistributing modifications, if I've, given them access to the source code, or if they've, reverse engineered it, they are able to do so. And they are able to redistribute any modifications. However, this is the clincher with freeware. If you want to make changes to my freeware software, and I've given you the source code and it's pretty easy, if you redistribute it, you can only do that as freeware. So you can't make any money. You can't take my freeware, do some mods and say, hey, everyone, you now can pay for this piece of software under a commercial license. It must stay under freeware. You cannot take my freeware software and make any monetary gain, if that makes sense. The last one is open source. Now, it has a little asterisk here under copyright because Open source software licenses mean, that I actually am able to see the source code. They're also called GNU licenses. Now, open source licenses or GNU licenses were created with the idea of multiple people collaborating, on the one piece of software. Heaps and heaps of people collaborating, heaps of people making changes and modifying it and, distribution. But the important point to note is that people didn't want to suffer legal ramifications. So, people wanted to still have a little bit, like most of your traditional copyright is removed, but people wanted to be able to distribute, modify, and redistribute without any particular, legal ramifications or legal consequences. And that's where the open source or GNU license came from. Okie dokie. So that is software licenses. Now, why do we have to have a software license? Can't everyone just play nice? Well, basically, the short answer to that is no. It is very easy to reproduce or recopy something, so we have to have a license that says, look, these are the terms and conditions under which this piece of software can be used. The other reasons that have led to the need for software licenses is particularly the fact that a lot of software is collaboratively developed, i.e. more than one person has developed it. So we need to be really clear about, this is the way in which you engage with this piece of software. So this person and this person and this person all, pretty much get access and get recognition, as well as the other flip side of collaborative development in the fact that you have things like open source or GNU licenses that some people really want to collaborate and create content together that doesn't necessarily have the option of going under these traditional software licenses. Final thing is, that has brought the need for software licenses is the internet. So the internet is a broad and vast network. It has, from a negative point of view, there's a lot of stuff out there and it's very easy to share. So we need to have boundaries and basically sets of agreements and rules of how we engage in software to stop illegal piracy. But also, the internet has allowed for the development of software, all around the globe in collaboration. So it's really important, like I said in the collaborative development dot point, that everyone who engages in that process is recognized. And the many authors from all kind of everyone who contributes to a piece of software needs to be recognized, hence the need for a software license agreement. The last thing, we need to look at in this dot point is sources of code and license conditions. So, why can I find some code online but not everything? So I can't find the code behind Microsoft Word online, but, I went onto a Whirlpool forum or a Stack Overflow forum the other day, or I was Googling online and I found a couple of pages that actually just gave me different modules or different sections of code. So why can I get somewhere and, not necessarily in the same place? So when you program software, you program it in different languages, and depending on the language that you're programming in, there's usually communities of developers that program in the same language. It is very common practice for those communities of developers to request or, strongly encourage people relinquish their intellectual property and copyright and post certain modules of code that they have coded in that particular language. I can find those modules and, I can often commonly find codes and tutorials on the internet, as well in, your traditional textbooks. Technically, the syllabus says books and magazines. Most of our time we are spending looking up modules of code or snippets of source code or tutorials of code on the internet. Textbooks often do have, tutorials of code and how to code things. So, that's the sources of code that are there. In terms of the license conditions that apply, they are usually relinquished of copyright. So, they say, look, please reuse, please enjoy, please incorporate. Most of the time, if it's, a specific user, they will dictate, yep, look, feel free to use this source code, but could you please just reference this in your source code? And as we start to program, we're going to discover all the different ways in which you can reference and credit and acknowledge different original users. And that's it, guys. That's intellectual property.